Welcome to the chapter on self-disclosure. We are looking at self-disclosure because self-disclosure helps you to repair broken relationships, and it also helps you to strengthen relationships. And so we'll be looking at self-disclosure from this lens. Relationships grow stronger when people share things about themselves. When you share things with people, it helps you to create a better bond. You know, there are instances where people work together for a long period of time and they never really get to know one another. Perhaps you know someone like that. I jokingly call those people super secret squirrels. But self-disclosure is something that I want everyone to honestly think about how we can improve self-disclosure. This doesn't mean to say that I want everyone to self-disclose more. Some of us have a natural tendency to overshare. This is a phenomenon in society that we call TMI. So we're going to look at what are appropriate levels of self-disclosure and learn how to be better at self-disclosure, but that doesn't necessarily mean self-disclosing more. So what is self-disclosure? Self-disclosure is letting other people know things about you, things that you may be thinking or feeling. There are different types of sharing information. There's self-description, which we'll look at in a few slides, and then there's more self-disclosure where you're sharing information that wouldn't be easily acquired elsewhere. Now, self-disclosure does involve both a degree of risk and a degree of courage. So anytime that you share something with someone, you do run the risk of them disagreeing or rejecting you or the information that you're sharing. But practicing proper levels of self-disclosure will help us to improve our communication. It will help us in conflict resolution, and it will help us in building relationships. So self-disclosure, a piece of it is self-description. This would be like our entry-level piece of self-disclosure. Self-description is where we're sharing non-threatening information. This would be things like our name, maybe our job, things that if you weren't sharing them, other people could fairly easily find out that information in another way. There are a lot of benefits of self-disclosure. So we have better accuracy in our communication when we have self-disclosure. Some examples of how self-disclosure can improve communication and accuracy. If someone, on occasion I have students in class that will tell me that they have difficulty hearing. This is a form of self-disclosure. I would not be able to get this information anywhere else if they didn't share it to me. They're sharing that they have a difficulty with me, but my knowing that they have difficulty hearing will help me to place them in a seat that helps them to be able to hear better. And I know that I'll need to speak louder or slower or more clearly when those students are in the classroom. Also, another example of self-disclosure is sharing what your attitude or your environment that's happening that day to you and how it may impact your ability to receive and send communications. Sometimes when we have a lot going on, it's going to increase our stress, right? And this can create some barriers to communication. So self-disclosing and at proper levels can also help us to reduce stress. Also, the more you practice self-disclosure, the more you are improving our levels of self-awareness. If you'll remember, our first chapter really talked about the role that self-awareness plays in helping us to have better human relations and better interactions. So how does self-disclosure help us to have stronger relationships? When you share something with someone that they may not have known about you, you're providing an opportunity to connect and to bond with that person. So this is part of the reason why lots of your faculty members on the first day of class for face-to-face students ask you to stand up and share something about yourself. We're trying to create that opportunity for students to connect with one another by self-disclosing something that someone else may find that they have in common with that person. Self-disclosure also helps improve relationships because you're increasing your authenticity with people. So when people are more open and more honest with you, you have higher levels of trust. So self-disclosure, just like communication that we've learned in our previous chapters, is a cycle. So when we self-disclose, we typically receive some sort of feedback. That feedback increases our self-awareness, and that increased self-awareness impacts how we self-disclose in the future. Like in most chapters, we have a grid for self-disclosure. So we're going to look at the Johari window as a model for understanding self-disclosure. So in quadrant 1, this is information that you know about yourself and information that others know about you. In quadrant 2, this is information that you may not realize about yourself, but other people realize this information about you. In quadrant 3, this is information that you know about yourself, but others do not know about you. And in quadrant 4, this is information not known by others about you, and it's not something that you're aware of either. So let's look at each quadrant in more detail. So our open area, this is our public area. This is information that you and others know. This is where most of our self-awareness is. So at the beginning of a relationship, we have the number 1 quadrant is the one where we typically begin our relationships. And as we go through these quadrants, you'll see how the grid lines will slide as relationships progress. So in this hidden information, this hidden area, this is where you have the most opportunity to improve your self-disclosure. The blind area is where you will need to utilize feedback in order to shrink the blind area. So in other words, paying attention to the feedback that people give you after self-disclosures will help you to improve your self-awareness, and the more self-aware you are, the smaller that blind area becomes. The unknown area. Now, I always like to joke about this, that anytime I try something new, I have a secret hope that I am just some sort of natural phenomenon when it comes to it. But so far, I'm not a magical piano player, guitarist, singer, or a chess player. But I'm hoping that one day I try something new and I am just the best at it and had no idea. But this is an example of that unknown area. So it could be unrecognized talents. It could also be unconscious motives, where you believe that you're acting or reacting in a certain way for a specific reason, but there could be underlying reasons that you're not aware of that are also moving you to act in that manner. So on this slide, this is the beginning of a relationship. So we see this unknown area is really large and the known area is really small. Then as the relationship progresses, the known area becomes larger and the unknown area becomes smaller. So what we're working on here, in addition to improving self-disclosure, is achieving greater awareness. We want to increase the amount of feedback that we get from others so that we can improve our self-awareness. One important note on this slide that I want everyone to spend some time thinking about. When you receive criticism, you should receive it as you receive a gift. When someone gives you a gift, you often look them in the eye, show gratitude, and thank them. When you can learn to receive criticism in the same manner, it's going to help you achieve greater levels of self-awareness. One form of feedback that we have on the job or within the organizational environments is 360-degree feedback. This is when people in their position are evaluated by their peers beside them, the vendors that they work with, the subordinates below them, and the supervisors above them. Doing the 360-degree feedback allows for someone to have a holistic picture of the relationships they have within their working environment. Another part of self-disclosure is the art of apologizing. Most of us have a difficult time apologizing, or so we think. How many times in an average day do you apologize to a random stranger for accidentally bumping into them or stepping into their path? Probably most of us do it several times a day. Now, how many times in an average day do we apologize to someone close to us for something that we may have done that caused them some sort of pain or some sort of disappointment? I would guess that is probably not even once a day do we do that. Does that mean that we never do things to hurt the people that are close to us? Of course not. Sometimes we do that and it's not even intentional. But whether or not you meant to do something doesn't mean that you shouldn't apologize for it. So when we're talking about apologizing, we're going to hope to communicate our 3 R's: regret, responsibility, and remedy. So when we apologize, we want to apologize with sincerity. We don't want to point the finger at others. We want to accept responsibility for your actions and also include a way that we will make sure to not repeat this offense in the future. So the art of apologizing is how we are working on repairing damaged relationships in regards to self-disclosure. Another part of apologizing is that we need to learn how to forgive as well. So in the next few slides, we'll look at the art of forgiveness as well. But before we get to that, let's look at some bad apologies. So we have the defensive apology, where you say, I'm sorry, but this is not a true apology. I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase before, but the word but erases everything that comes before it. Contingent apologies, this is the one that we throw out there when we know someone's annoyed with us or upset with us, but we don't know why, and we're not going to take the time to figure it out. So we throw this out there hoping that this Band-Aid will work. The too late apology, I disagree with this book on this. I feel like it's never too late to apologize. Of course, you should always apologize as soon as you recognize that you've done something wrong. Sometimes it takes us longer than others to remember or realize that we've done something wrong. So don't withhold an apology just because you feel that it's too late. For the bully apology, I am sometimes guilty of this myself. The bully apology is, sorry that I had to do this, but I'm doing it anyway. It's better than no apology, right? But if you're relying on the bully apology to get things done on a regular basis, there's something wrong and you need to revisit why you're making this choice. So let's look at apologizing. We have our 3 R's that we looked at earlier. How are we going to practice our art of forgiveness as well? So if someone does offer an apology, you need to be quick to forgive in order for the reparative issues to begin falling into place for the relationship. Forgiveness, like apologizing, is not easy, especially if you have hurt feelings. But again, this is the only way that you're going to begin the healing process. And lots of times, once we have forgiven someone, we have less of that negative energy floating around, and it helps us to become more energetic and more creative. So how can we practice appropriate self-disclosure? So something that you disclose to your best friend while the two of you are in the car may be appropriate. If you disclose that exact same information in the crowded break room at work with a coworker, it may be inappropriate self-disclosure. So understanding the right time and the right place for self-disclosure will help you to make sure that you are doing it appropriately. Constructive criticism is a form of self-disclosure. Now, some of us tend to be more blunt than others. So you don't want to hit people over the head with a hammer when we're providing constructive criticism. So there's 2 effective methods that we can practice doing better constructive criticism with. So rather, when you say you a lot, it seems like it's finger pointing to the other person. So try to use I in the place of you whenever possible. Also, and making a specific request for the future instead of pointing out something negative in the past will help you to prevent, to share constructive criticism. So if something has gone badly, rather than saying, that went really badly last week, say, hey, when this happens again next week, let's make sure to try and do this differently so that things can be better than last time. When we're looking at self-disclosure and things that may go wrong, you do want to discuss situations as they happen. If you wait too long to discuss them after they happen, people may forget about the reasons why things happen, or they may forget what actually did happen. So they're going to forget details about the situation. Also, sharing and disclosing about situations as they happen also helps to clear the air sooner so that people can get back to being more productive. Another way that we appropriately apply self-disclosure is to describe our feelings and our emotions. A lot of times in the workplace, emotions are viewed as inappropriate. I completely agree with that. Other than maybe happiness, emotions really don't have a place in the work environment. But letting people know how you feel is different than sharing emotions. This is probably one of the riskier parts of self-disclosure that we'll talk about in this chapter, because it requires some level of trust for the people that you are self-disclosing to. Also, we want to avoid overwhelming others. So remember, earlier in this lecture, I talked about avoiding TMI. So you can overwhelm people if you have too much self-disclosure. So you need to find a balance between being open and also being cognizant of people's level of comfort with self-disclosure. So I've talked about trust a few times on slides today. So this is a great table in the book that shows you ways that self-disclosure builds trust and ways that a lack of self-disclosure or bad self-disclosure can destroy trust. Within our jobs or within organizations, there's likely going to be more self-disclosure when people feel that they are comfortable or working within a safe environment. So there are some ways that you can test and assess your levels of self-disclosure to help you determine if you are having appropriate levels of self-disclosure. Okay, please don't forget to complete the other assignments that are tied to this chapter, and I hope you guys have a great day.